We're going to get started since it's 2:30. We have a bit of information to get through and want to make sure we're out of here in time for the policy meeting here at 4 o'clock too. Thank you all for attending though, and I'm sure we might have some people trickling in. You can see we're recording this as well, so if we talk about anything that you want to go back and review, or if you have colleagues that couldn't be here, they can review as well. So I'm Dylan Mullenix, and the Executive Director of the Des Moines Area MPO. Thank you for coming to our orientation. This orientation we haven't done in this kind of big setting like this for a while. So bear with us. This was kind of a new thing for us. And if you have further questions after the fact, don't have to come sit down, meet one-on-one. And we try to do more education throughout the year, not just one time. So what we want to do with this orientation is talk about a couple of things. One is just introduce you to what the MPO is, explain what MPOs do, that sort of stuff. Second phase is going to be talking more about like, what do we need from you, for lack of a better term, what does it need to be a good representative? What's going to make it more effective organization? And throughout, we've got some fun pop quizzes that we will test your knowledge on, see if you're paying attention. So real quick, before we get into things too much, I thought it'd be good to introduce ourselves to one another. We'll hold back and introduce ourselves here in a moment as staff, but want to start, Dick, you want to start?
I'm Nick Osborne, Assistant City Administrator for the City of Waukee, new representative for the tech.
Mike Schrock, I'm the Assistant City Manager, and Kenny Buck, also the interim city.
Ryan Belkelberger, Senior Planner, City of Pleasant Hill.
Julie Helm, Dallas County Supervisor.
Mike Jones, Mayor of Windsor Heights.
Keegan Haynes, Transit Planner for DART, Alternate Technical Committee.
Tony Filippini, DART Planning Manager.
Amanda Waukee, I'm the CEO at DART.
So we'll talk about some of the activities that the MPO does, and we've outlined them here as a hierarchy of activities. So at the bottom, if you think of the pyramid, we want the strong base at the bottom. We've got governance and operations because we can't perform our duties if we don't have that good governance and operations. Then we move on to federal requirements. Those are things that we are federally required to do. Then we have member services. Those are things that we do for our members. They're not necessarily federally required, but we do them anyway. And then at the top is these what we're calling wildly important projects. What are these big, hairy things that we do as an organization that helps move the region along? And we'll get into some examples of that. So starting at the bottom with the governance and operations, just a backup of what MPOs are in general. So back in the 1960s, MPOs were a requirement. There was the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1962 said you need to have these institutions that bring everybody together in the region to facilitate and communicate on transportation issues. This was happening around the time that the interstate system was being planned and developed, so it kind of made sense that you needed to get people together to figure those kind of things out. The MPO is really just a policy board. That's its function. It's here to bring all those different entities that you see on the screen, cities, counties, transit authorities, DOTs, the public, bring them all together to have those conversations. So there's a couple of things that the MPOs are core functions. Like I said, it's really, as a former director used to say, the MPO is the table and chairs that brings the region together. We set the table, you all come, have those conversations. So the MPOs plan, we fund, we analyze, we convene, we facilitate. And I think importantly, we also look at what MPOs don't. So we're not transit, we're not the ones operating that. Typically, MPOs don't build or own or operate anything. That's up to you as cities and counties and the DOT. We just help get the process going and make sure that if there's especially federal funds involved, everything's working the way it's supposed to do so you can get your projects done. There are 9 MPOs in Iowa. MPOs are federally required in any urban area over 50,000. So not cities over 50,000, but urban areas. So you can see on the map there are 9 urban areas throughout the state. Our MPO is kind of unique in this map in Iowa. We are the only ones that are what I will call a standalone or independent MPO. All of the other ones are either housed within a city. So Ames and Iowa City, Cedar Rapids act that way. It's kind of a city department that runs the MPO, or they're in a larger council of government or regional planning commission. We're the only ones that don't have any of that. We just are our own thing. Looking more specifically at our own MPO, we used to be housed within a regional planning commission back in the 1960s when it was started. Like I said, the federal requirement came into being. That organization went defunct in the late 70s, early 80s. So since 1983, we have operated under that kind of independent organization. It started out being called the Des Moines Transportation Planning Committee. And in 1993, it was renamed to the MPO. We are a 28E organization. And I'm sure you're all familiar with what that means. We have bylaws. Those were last updated in 2018. We have 20 voting members. I'll get into this in a moment, but there's voting members and there's non-voting members. And it's really just a matter of, are you in the MPO planning area or have a certain population? So you can see what the 20 voting members are on that screen or up there on that list. And then you can see the map of our planning area boundary. So that black line is where we have jurisdiction for Rocky Fairwood. We are required to look at what is within the urban area and then anything we think might become developed or urbanized within the 20-year time horizon. So we take a look at all of everybody's comprehensive plans. Where do you think growth is going to happen? And that's where we draw that boundary. I don't know how well you can see this. I should have mentioned too that there's a handout over here that's a representative handbook that has some of this information in it too. So if you need a copy, let us know. We'll hand that out. So it's got a chart you could probably actually read in here. But this is our organizational structure. So there's three main committees in the middle: technical committee, executive, and policy. And we'll talk more about those in a moment. But they're kind of the core spine of who makes decisions and who's involved in these conversations. And then we've got a couple other things. So we have some policy subcommittees. There's a few standing ones like our funding subcommittee, our finance subcommittee that looks at our financial records and budgets, things like that. Personnel committee. Yeah, please come in. Nominating committee, as well as just any ad hoc committees that might be necessary as we go along. Over here on the left, we have our technical committee. They oftentimes have subcommittees as well, so don't be surprised, especially as we get working on projects or plans that will form committees. They'll do the work and then those kind of dissolve. We also have a number of advisory committees. So we have a bicycle pedestrian roundtable that works on, as the name implies, bicycle and pedestrian related activities. Those are bigger than just our cities and our staffs. They bring in folks that are just have an interest in bicycle pedestrian issues and help us identify the situations that we need to be aware of. We also have a freight committee, an environmental roundtable, an emerging technology roundtable. I won't read them all off to you, but we have a number of roundtables. And that's really this is a form of public engagement for us, knowing that our boards nor our staff know everything about all the systems that we deal with. So let's bring in the people that actually live this and deal with this every day. And that's part of how we do that. Throughout the process, there's opportunities for public engagement. Some things we are required to have public involvement on. Other things we just think that's good practice. Make sure we have them. Looking more at the couple of committees that we have and getting into how many votes, how many representatives, and that sort of thing. Like I said, there's a technical, executive, and policy committee. The executive committee is really just a subset of the policy committee. So to be a voting member on the MPO, you have to be a community that's within that planning area that I showed a moment ago and have over 3,000 in population. Dallas County is the one that doesn't need that because they were grandfathered in. The unincorporated portion of Dallas County within the MPO is below that threshold, but they still get a vote. You get additional representatives on the MPO for every 50,000 in population. So what that means for our communities or for our MPO is West Des Moines and Ankeny have 2 votes. Des Moines has 5 votes. Everybody else has 1 vote. We also have a mechanism for a weighted vote, though that's never come into play in my time. For our executive committee, we have an 11-member executive, and those population thresholds of 50,000 or above or under dictates who's on that committee. So again, those communities over 50,000, Ankeny, West Des Moines, and Des Moines, have a designated seat on the executive committee. Polk County does as well. Communities that are under 50,000 are divided into one of 3 sub areas. So that's 15 communities divided into 3 sub areas. So each of those sub areas pick 2 of their 5 communities to sit on the executive committee. So I hope that's kind of clear. It's a little bit of a process when we come to determine who's on the executive committee, but we make it work. Doing it that way, though, ensures that we have geographic balance and we have size and community balance so that everyone has a voice in the goings on. And also, please feel free to stop and ask questions as we go along here. In terms of budget, I'll touch on this real quick. Most of our revenue comes from either, or all of our revenue comes from either U.S. Department of Transportation, We get about 2/3 of our funding from the US DOT in the form of what they call planning funds. So these are funds that are just for their operations and planning work. It's not the funds that go out to the communities. And then local assessments. So we charge $1 per capita to our members that match those federal funds. Occasionally, there's other grants or contracts, but usually it's just those two funding mechanisms. But as far as costs, it's really just the cost of the office space, our staff, fringe benefits, that sort of stuff. Occasionally, special contracts for consultants, data, those sorts of things. Again, we're not in the business of building or owning or operating things, so it's pretty minimal. Our budget's just a little over $2 million. So now we'll get to the point where we introduce staff. So like I said, I'm Dylan. I've been here for about 6. Turn it over to, go down the line here. I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves.
Gunnar Olson, Planning and Public Affairs Manager, been here 10 years, working in a wide range of things. Dabble in a lot of the planning components, any communications, media run through me, and then work with the director on legislative issues and strategy.
Tracy, Ron.
Brenda Miller. I do the accounting, bookkeeping, and reimbursements for DOT. I'm Tracy Deckard. I kind of run the office around here most of the time. I've been here a little over 10 years. Kind of the office mom, trying to keep everybody in line, and also kind of take care of handling communications with the board. So if you need anything get a hold of me and I can take care of it.
Marcus Kanan, I'm a senior planner. I mostly deal with data.
Addison Williamson, associate planner. I started here last year. Been working on grant writing, the tips. So if you have any tip questions, you can send those to me. Transportation improvement program, we'll get to that in a bit.
I'm Carl Saxon. I'm a multimodal planner, so I primarily focus on bicycle pedestrian related issues and help facilitate the bicycle pedestrian roundtable.
Before I forget, in that handbook that we passed out, there's a list of acronyms towards the back. So if you hear us slip up, we'll try to keep ourselves speaking in full sentences. But if we slip up and use some acronyms that are unfamiliar to you, please reference that. The acronyms are.
Dylan, I have a question. So structurally, what's the difference between like an RPA, Regional Planning Association versus what we have here?
Yeah, so MPOs are the urban version of an RPA. So in Iowa, there's either metropolitan planning organizations or regional planning affiliations. Everywhere in the state is covered by one of them. There are 18 regional planning affiliations, 9 MPOs. MPOs are urban, they're federally required. Regional planning affiliations are more rural, they're not federally required, but Iowa DOT instituted them.
Do they follow the same rules?
They follow fairly similar rules. Basically, the MPOs are, again, they're federally required, so we get federal funding to do it. The state takes their federal funding and leaves that out among the RPAs. So they're funded through kind of similar mechanisms, but we have more direct ties to the federal government than the state government than an MPO. Anything else? So real quick, as we end this section, what decade were MPOs founded? The 60s. All right, very good. In the back, you're right over here if you want. We have slap bracelets, we have stress ball. Feel free to help yourself as getting that question right. All right. I will turn it over to Gunnar now to talk about federal requirements.
Thank you. Now that you've gotten the tutorial on how the ship runs, now we're going to talk about some of our mission critical plans and processes. Stuff I'm going to talk about is the bread and butter of the MPO. I'm going to cover it quickly. If there's things you want to touch on more later, more than happy to do so. And I'll say the things we're going to talk about here are the key plans and the things that most people think of when they think of the MPO. I've been here for 10 years now, and I feel like if you boil down what we do to a single thing, it is that we open up channels of federal transportation dollars to come into the local economy. That at its core is what we do. And so some of the elements of that take the place of these plans or work products. Probably the most visible plan that we produce once every 5 years is a long-range transportation plan. This was recently updated and adopted in November. It's called Mobilizing Tomorrow. If you want federal funding for your projects, the long-range transportation plan needs to speak to it. If it doesn't call it out specifically, at least needs to cover it in terms of a goal or objective. Following that, the Transportation Improvement Plan, or TIP, one of our favorite and most frequently used TLAs. TLA, keep up, is a 3-letter acronym. The tip is where we document the next 4 years of projects that have any federal funding tied to them. And that's an important housekeeping item because it's required for you to expend your federal dollars. Something we do every year is develop a work plan, specifically called a unified planning work program. Our budget is also included in that. That spells out all the activities that we're going to try to accomplish in the coming fiscal year. Our fiscal year follows the same as your jurisdictions on a July 1 to June 30 cycle. Another important plan that we have to keep updated is the public participation plan. This is where we state how we're going to engage the public and then hold ourselves accountable to doing the things that we set up to do. So I just covered a lot of ground with one slide here, but that's a big chunk of everything that we do here.
Hunter, how does somebody get a tip, to get their project in a tip?
Would send an email to Addie and we would get it added.
Can a project be in a tip if it's not in the long range plan?
I don't know if we've ever encountered such a scenario. It's usually if they would just align.
If we have had instances where maybe a community applies for an earmark, they get the earmark or they get the grant, but it's not in the plan. We can amend the long range plan. That has to happen first, and then we can put it into the tip.
Understood.
Every year, and this process is going to start here pretty soon, but every year we do an open call for projects for the tip as well. So if you have a project that's in the tip or maybe needs to be in the tip or moved, there's a time that we do that, but we also take amendments throughout the year.
So MPO funding is probably what people think of the MPO the most. It's one of our core activities. And the primary program that we award is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. These are funds that come from the federal government and that are given over to the MPO to make decisions about how best to spend them locally. The long range transportation plan that I referenced, that helps us come up with a regional vision for how we should spend the money. And this is how we can help implement and influence how the implementation of the transportation system goes. So I'll call out on the right-hand side there. We do have funding targets. These are not set in stone, they are targets. But what the MPO has traditionally tried to do over the last several years is allocate no more than 30% toward roadway capacity, minimum of 20% towards bridge. And then there's been a shift toward major reconstruction. That's not to say maintenance, just layover or something, but major reconstruction, with an emphasis being on maintaining the system we have. And then system optimization falls to that category as well. So let's get the most out of the existing infrastructure that we already have. And then we have a long-standing tradition of spending a minimum of 10% on transit that typically goes toward replacement buses and helps keep their fleet current. We award approximately $18 million every year from this program, Supervisor.
Henry, do we anticipate any changes in the STPG program from the federal government?
Boy, are you going to be at the policy committee meeting? We have an agenda item dedicated to a discussion on legislative changes.
Yeah, but crystal ball.
The short answer is we don't anticipate changes to this program. That's the short answer.
So the funds, as I understand it, flow from the federal government to the state government to the MPO.
It's
And there's been no directives or pauses or issuance of
No freezing.
decrees from on high. Yeah,
there are a lot of unknowns, Supervisor. Put it politely.
yeah.
The staff assessment is that what we're seeing for STBG anyway, we don't anticipate changing.
Okay,
We've seen directives talking about priorities of the administration. We have seen one NOFO revised from the RAISE grant program to the BUILD grant program. And so we saw upfront personal how they were changing those priorities. And the core of the program did change. And in fact, the one that we were actively working on behalf of one of our member jurisdictions, we think the changes actually made that particular application more competitive. But
What about like carbon reduction funding?
Carbon reduction got eliminated.
the carbon reduction program funding that's the one that is clearly out of alignment with the new administration's priorities. And there's a lot of question marks about that.
The direction that we've received is that any funding that is in the current infrastructure bill will likely stay there. It's more of once that bill expires, it probably, in carbon reduction program's case, it wouldn't probably be renewed. So we need to be careful when we're awarding funds. If we go beyond that, we just need to be very clear that those funds might have to be rescinded if that program doesn't continue. But there haven't been indications yet that they're gonna yank the funds that we've
And already.
been already been obligated and appropriated.
Emphasis on yet.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Well, it's only, what,
That changes by the day.
But none of the funding for the electric vehicle charging stations were included in STBG's formula. It was all separate and apart as a separate grant program under what? What was the separate grant program?
So there was a couple different programs. They were discretionary programs, so we had to apply to them.
Okay,
that we were awarded.
Electric vehicles aren't eligible, or infrastructure is eligible under SDBG. It's a very wide ranging program, but we have not awarded any funds.
okay. And that funding has been paused.
The discretionary programs for electric vehicles, yes, that,
Okay.
well, it was paused and then they rescinded their pause, so I guess I don't know exactly where that stands.
Okay.
We didn't have any funding impacted by it.
All right, thank you.
So the other programming that the MPO has had the responsibility of allocating throughout the region is a program called what we refer to as a transportation alternatives program. That's what it's known by locally. That's actually the previous name of the program, but the name changed to Surface Transportation Block Grants Set Aside. And that's just so confusing that we use the old name. But we award about $1.5 million annually there. These go toward pedestrian, bicycle facilities, recreational trails, safe service to school type stuff. And then more recently, under the bipartisan infrastructure law, the carbon reduction program was another program that was handled similarly to the SDBG, where the MPO was going to be the one to allocate those locally. And we've had nearly $10 million of funding to allocate over a 5-year period. Some of that has been allocated, not all of it. As Dylan explained, there's some questions about which money is good and which might not be.
Ask a question, just related to the tip, because the timeline's coming up on that, right? Someone asked me if we should try and speed that up ahead of what we normally do, given the environment. I was curious if you had any conversation about sometimes.
I'll take a first crack at this. The administration recently, we are newly learning that anything that the DOT needs approval on has to go not just through the Iowa Office of Federal Highway, but to the US DOT for approval, which, as you can imagine, is a huge potential for delay. So the TIP is a document that would need that type of approval. We're still trying to understand if that's going to apply, if that's going to change. If what we learned today holds to be true, I think it does it puts us in a position of having a tip that is way behind schedule. This is all very new. We haven't talked internally about whether we try to accelerate that timeline in order to get it in earlier. Imagine that's a strategy a lot of MPOs will be discussing at this time, but again, it's all very new.
Yeah, we can't spend the funding until that fiscal year is arrived yet, because we award funds. One thing we didn't mention is we award the funds 4 years in advance of when the funds will actually be spent. So this year, 2025, we will be awarding 2029 funding. That gives everyone 4 years to find the local match, to get the designs finished, that sort of thing. So we have awarded carbon reduction funds out through 2028. We can't necessarily roll 2028 dollars forward. We have to wait until 2028 to do it. But we do have some projects that are using $26, but they're programmed in 28. We can try to move those forward. So it's kind of it's a puzzle we have to figure out the rules for before we put it together here. And the rules are always changing.
So STPG question, Dylan, you've heard this before, but so the process of the funds flowing from the feds, the state to the MPO, believe it's the feds that require a submittal and a process that would evaluate the award of those, the competitive process. So I had mentioned, hey, what about a per capita so that we can plan ahead as cities? We could just get that. Could we, as an MPO, create rules or something that could satisfy the feds so that we could look at more of a per capita basis of awarding funds? for receiving funds on an annual basis?
Yeah, I think that would be complicated to do. We have inquired, I think if they see anything that sniffs of just putting together a formula that isn't competitive, they would not allow us to do it. There are some other creative things we could potentially do. Sure. If we gave all our, Ankeny, we want to give all our money to you and you turn around and give back local dollars that we can then allocate, sure. But that requires a big lift from one or two communities that I don't know that we have the capacity. Right.
I'd say over the last several decades, the approach has been to spread the peanut butter. We have a slide coming up here where we talk about, I'm gonna skip this because I think this is illustrative. You all pay dues, as Dylan mentioned, into our organization. And we strive for you all to have a positive ROI, a very black and white benefit ratio where your dollars in are a multiple of what you get back. So you can see the benefit ratio on the side here. This is due for an update. This is about 1 year out of date, but we haven't got to it yet. Anyway, you can see that most members have a positive ROI on this. And the approach has been lately just kind of spread the peanut butter around. We've talked with the policy committee about potentially being more strategic in those dollars rather than spreading a little bit around every year. Maybe we target 1 or 2 really big significant projects. Ultimately, that is a policy committee decision. They set the strategic direction.
I'll point out as well, the 2 communities that have zeros just didn't apply for funding. So it's not that the committee didn't award any, there were no applications from them.
Okay, see who's been paying attention. Which federally required work product identifies goals, strategies, and funding for the next 20+ years?
Transportation plan. I got trans.
I'll pause here if any questions for the material I covered. Like I said, we covered a lot of ground, a lot of the bread and butter work products at the MPO. Happy to go into depth outside later if you like. Oh, there's more.
I gave you 2. This one came up earlier.
True or false? Projects can only be federally funded if they're in the long range transportation plan. Nice job. Okay. And Carl, you're up.
All right, so in addition to all that, the MPO does provide some member services, which I'll go ahead and talk about. So we have a pretty robust trail network, over 600 miles of trails in our region, inside our planning area. And with that comes a pretty high need to monitor those trails. So we have a couple ways that we do that. We have a permanent trail counter solution, which are installed out on the trails. You see them, they kind of look like the top right picture, just little ballers sticking out of the ground. But those count pedestrians and we can use that data to help make strategic decisions about how we grow that network and how we prioritize investment. So we can use those counts for grant applications and also just to monitor our trail usage. A really cool innovation that came out of this office was a data bike. So we use this tool to go out and monitor our trail pavement condition. So we take pictures of the trails, we monitor the roughness of the trail, and take 3D imagery or 360-degree imagery that's published up to Google and provides tourists and trail users with an ability to look at the trail prior to going out, and also is published in an annual report, which will be coming out hopefully in April, which gives jurisdictions a look at how their trails are stacking up in the region and the need to prioritize maintenance along those trails. Other member services that we have are grant and writing and administration. So any project of regional significance, the MPO can support or lead in grant writing. Modeling services, so we have travel demand model and growth scenarios, data and map making, provide condition analysis and GIS out of this office, and then also letters of support and the DC list, which prioritizes projects around the region, which we then take to DC and talk with our congressional delegation. So a pop quiz about that. Which statement is false about the MPO's data bank? That's right. This is D. The data bike is free for all of our members to use. The MPO focuses on our regional trail network. However, many jurisdictions have local trails that they own, and it can use our data bike to monitor the condition of those as well. All right, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Marcus.
So Dylan mentioned that MPOs don't usually build or operate or own anything. But occasionally we get involved in some pretty large projects that we end up managing a piece of or get funding for. So I'm gonna kind of go over those. The first one here is one that's actively going on right now, the State Streets and Roads for All project. We have a comprehensive safety action plan that we're working on. Covers the entire region, and it's working, you can see the boards back there, working to identify key projects in the region that we want to advance into a grant application for transportation safety funding. That's a fun one that we're currently working on. The transload facility, some of you might know this, several years ago, we started working on an analysis for this transload location here in the east side of Des Moines. We got a $11.2 million building grant to help with the construction of it. This location is unique from a freight perspective because it brings in 3 class 1 rail carriers and 1 class 2 rail carrier. And the interesting thing is that only about 25% of all shippers have access to one of those class 1 carriers. It has 3. So it's really just, you know, a great location for shipping goods across the country and internationally. And then, you know, we did support some construction of this project. Great success, still ongoing. I'd like to talk about it quite a bit. And it really supports the freight network that we have. Another one of these projects that is large and audacious was our water trails plan. To our knowledge, it was the first regional plan for water trails in the state. It was probably the first regional water trails plan in the country. You guys know of any? Yeah. Looked at, you know, all of our waterways that could actively carry residents, and this really focuses on recreational amenities. And of course, we were awarded a $25 million building grant. Again, pretty unheard of from the federal funding perspective, because this is a waterway and we were looking at it for recreation, and most of the building grant projects for transportation way related. So it really set us apart as a region. That might be my, oh, we got one more. Future 435 is another one that's currently ongoing. We've spent several years working through seeking interstate designation for the 565 bypass to have clear signage, look at economic development along the region, support future economic development, maintain access to existing users, which are slow-moving vehicles, overweight vehicles, typically supporting the ag industry. Required steps, a state exemption for minimum speed limits, and then a federal weight exemption to address those existing users. So this is a project that's ongoing. Gunner is working diligently at the state level to get legislation guided through State House so that we can continue the next steps of this project. Pop quiz. Which wildly important project is necessary to be eligible for regional safe streets and safe streets for all application? I don't know about the wording of that. D, wonderful. Everyone's excited about the safe streets money. And you're going to pass it too? Pass it? Okay, perfect.
Everyone, definitely flown through this today, and so we have a little more time, and I'll be circling back now to our second agenda promise, which is talking about how to effectively serve as an MPO committee representative. But I thought maybe those who walked in a little bit after we started missed the introductions at the beginning. We could hear your name, what jurisdiction you represent, quickly.
Right at me. So John Dostart, City of Altoona. I'm the city engineer, so I'm on the technical committee.
Neil Wagner, I'm with Des Moines Airport, CFO.
Isaac Peasley, I'm with the city of Monterey, city planner.
It was in Merritt, Des Moines.
Matt McCoy, Polk County Supervisor.
Great, I think that was everyone giving up introductions. So the first question you might be asking yourself is, when are we meeting here? And when will I be finding out what we'll be discussing and voting on and so on and so forth at different agenda items. So the technical committee meets the first Thursday of every month at 9:30 a.m. And if you've served in the past, the executive committee is a slight change. They'll now be meeting on the same day, the first Thursday of every month at 11:30 a.m. Policy then meets the third Thursday of every month at 4 p.m. And they do not meet typically in March, July, or December unless there's a special item or a special need for a meeting. Our promise to you then is to have agendas emailed out approximately 1 week prior to those meetings. They'll also be placed on our website. Some meetings may have a presentation from an outside organization, usually pertaining to something on the agenda or something upcoming on future agendas. An email summary of the meeting will be sent afterwards, and you can manage your subscription to the MPO at that link there. And then for those of you who will be serving on roundtables, subcommittees, working groups, those meetings and the schedules for those will vary depending on who is present. And then you can see example of a policy agenda email you may be seeing from us. All right, we'll close it out with just a few bullet points here, thinking about what are qualities of effective committee participation. And this will span, of course, from technical to exec to policy to subcommittees. First quality for effective committee participation, doing your homework prior to meeting. As we send those agendas out 1 week prior, we hope that gives you enough time to review the items, come with any questions that you may have, discussion points pertaining to your jurisdiction. Showing up in person is a really great way to be effective as a committee member as well. We're sending your alternate if you're unable to make it. We do have a Zoom link as well if virtual option is needed. Asking questions, both in and outside of the meeting. All of us as staff are very happy to answer any questions that you may have, both during and after before meetings. Connecting with committee members and peers outside of the committee meeting. And serving as a liaison between the MPO and your jurisdiction, bringing the needs of your peers and residents from your communities to the MPO is another great way to be an effective committee member. And with that, that actually concludes the presentation. Oh, never mind. We have a pop quiz. How could I forget? So, pop quiz. Which of the following are qualities of effective committee participation?
It's easy.
I'll be back. Thank you. I'll pass this off to.
Thanks for discussion.
Yeah.
So we went through that kind of quick, but that's good because we have time. We want to hear from you. If there's things we didn't cover, things you still have questions